How do you feel about the prospects of this country as it's heading out the door, if it's still heading out the door, taking part in the European parliamentary elections? Remember, this is the absolute minimum requirement for the European Union 27 leaders to grant us the extension that the Prime Minister has asked for. Although I should say it's slightly odd that she asked for the same extension that she asked for last month and didn't get. I think perhaps on the assumption that she will have to get a longer extension that will be offered by the European Union, but she doesn't want to be seen to be asking for it. Anyway, this is all terribly annoying, and we're deep in the weeds here on extensions. But the likelihood now is that we will take part in these European parliamentary elections. And one of the people taking part, presumably, is UKIP leader Gerard Batten. He's now in the studio with us. Good morning.
Hello, Matt. Good morning.
Have you drawn up your list of candidates?
Oh, we've been preparing for this for months because we've reluctantly had to concede that the whole process is being betrayed, and the likely outcome was we weren't going to leave and we take part in the European elections. We would much prefer that we'd left and we weren't taking part in the European elections, but it was my responsibility to prepare for it. We've selected our candidates. All we have to do now in the next few days is place them in the list so we know who's number one, who's 2, 3 and 4, etc. That's a process we'll do in the next couple of days. And we're ready to fight.
Is Tommy Robinson on that list?
No, absolutely not. He's not a member of the party. He can't join the party unless the rules were not changed, but interpreted to allow him to do that. That isn't on my agenda. My agenda now is to fight these elections and to get the best possible result.
So you are ruling out here on the record that he will ever run as an MEP for your party?
It's never been possible. And he wouldn't be considered anyway, with all due respect to him and everybody else. The only people that have been selected are ones that have either had a proven track record of loyalty to the party, have fought previous elections for the party, or in 1 or 2 cases which are going to give us a bit of fun in that election, are people who can give us a lot more exposure in the social media.
We'll talk about that in a minute, but is he still your advisor, Tommy Robinson?
Yes, in a kind of nominal way. He's had so much on his plate with his personal issues over the last few months that he hasn't actually been able to do very much.
Like his jail sentence, for instance?
Like an unjust jail sentence, which has been appealed and is now being unjustly prosecuted again, like having his life threatened and all kinds of things like that, which maybe you should get him on the show and get him to tell you about it. I'm sure your audience would go up a bit if you did, but he's the best person to tell you about that.
But you have got a convicted felon as an advisor.
There are convicted felons in the House of Lords. We have a convicted felon who's been voting on this process in the House of Commons. Tommy Robinson is not a career criminal. He's never made a living out of innocent people as victims. And I'm not too bothered about what I think are some either minor convictions or when he was fitted up, quite frankly, when you have a completely corrupt political system where convicted felons making laws over us. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, Matt. Nigel
Farage, the founder of UKIP, has left the party, and he's left it because he thinks that you're too obsessed with Tommy Robinson.
I've not been obsessed at all. The only time I talk about it is when people like you ask me about it, Matt. I've got much more pressing things on my agenda. Nigel walked away from UKIP back in 2016. Didn't want anything to do with it. I think he just used this as an excuse to go. If he'd have actually decided to hang around, if he'd have actually fought the leadership election back in early 2018 when I took on the leadership because nobody else would do it, he could have actually been leader now and could have been leading UKIP into these elections. He didn't want to do that. What he wanted is to, if the European elections came, he wanted to have a party where he's the leader, doesn't have a national executive committee, doesn't have members, it has subscribers. He got fed up with the democratic process of UKIP because we are a democratic party, and that's why he's waltzed off and is now doing his thing with the Brexit Party, which isn't really a Liberal party anyway. They've got a name. They haven't got any members. Yesterday I saw an email where 1 week away from when we have to, when the European elections may be formally declared, he's inviting people to become candidates at £100 a time for assessment. Okay. So what kind of party is that?
Just to get back to Tommy Robinson briefly, he's still your advisor, as you've just told us. What do you take his advice on, and what kind of advice does he give you?
He hasn't actually been able to do a great deal for me because he's been preoccupied with other matters. But he is a man who goes up and down the country interviewing victims of these grooming gangs, which I haven't got the time to do, and he wants to put together a body of evidence on that. And what he's going to concentrate on when he's able to spend his time doing that properly is not that it happened or who did it, but who covered it up. The local authorities, the police, and elements of the Labour Party in different regions where this has gone on, and that's what he wants to uncover, and that's why the establishment want to destroy him.
But I mean, you're UKIP, right? That's the independent, UK Independence Party. You're all about the European Union. What are you doing? Fanning hatred against Islam. What's that got to do with politics?
Will you explain to me how I fan hatred against Islam? Matt,
Okay.
tell me how I fan hatred.
Well, you called Islam a death cult.
Yeah, I talk about the ideology of the belief system, which other people do as well. There's an excellent book on this by a chap called Peter McLaughlin that analyses the whole thing. I'm concerned about the ideology. I have nothing against individuals or groups of individuals. I have friends who are Muslims. I mix with people
Does that
like
make
that all the
Christianity a
time.
death cult, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth?
No, because it's completely different. Now, did you ask me on to talk about the European elections and politics, or do you want to talk about theology?
Let's talk about European elections. So you stood up in the European Parliament and you said to Michel Barnier and Jean-Claude Juncker, you have done what Philip of Spain, Napoleon and Kaiser Wilhelm and Hitler couldn't do. You brought Britain to its knees without firing a single shot. But you could not have done any of these things without the connivance of the traitors, the quislings and the collaborators in the British Parliament and the British establishment.
Absolutely true.
That's just nonsense, isn't it?
I tell you what.
The reason why Britain wants to leave the EU is not because we've been pushed out, because we voted to leave the EU.
But we're not leaving, are we, Matt? That's why we're sitting here talking about this now.
They're not. It's not as if they're not letting us go.
Let me recommend something to you. I wrote a little book about 4 years ago, in which I explained if there was a referendum, if Leave won, this is what the establishment would do. They would delay it, they would impede it with the aim of overturning it. There's been an excellent article written.
But that's got nothing to do with Europe.
Let me just finish the point, please. There's an excellent article been written last week in Politico magazine by Tom McTague, which goes into detail about how this whole thing was lost. It's called How the UK Lost Brexit. And it's an excellent article that analyses this whole thing and explains how from day one the EU worked with the British establishment to make this not happen. And the biggest mistake was right at the beginning when they triggered Article 50, when they should have set it aside and not gone down the Article 50 road. None of this would have been possible if we were playing by our rules and not the EU's rules.
That may very well be true, and I've heard that analysis from quite a few people in the Tory party. But to use the language, traitors, quislings and collaborators, that is precisely the kind of language that the police has warned against, because it's too inflammatory.
So now the police might pay me a visit because of something I've said in the European Parliament. Well, they can if they like. I'm sure there's a lot of police officers who probably actually agree with me. Let me explain the origin of the word treason. It's from the Latin traditio, which means to hand over. And what could have been more treasonous than the last 46 years of our national life when power's been handed over to a foreign power, which is the European Union? Our whole membership of the European Union has been unlawful under our constitution because there can be no higher authority than the Queen in Parliament, and yet they have purported to hand over authority and lawmaking ability to a foreign power. The whole thing is treasonous, and it's about time we called people out for what they are.
But you're comparing EU leaders to Adolf Hitler.
No, I said they've done something that those people hadn't done.
I mean, that's just nonsense, isn't it? It shows an incredibly thin understanding of history.
It doesn't at all. They have done things that those people weren't able to do. That doesn't mean I'm comparing them to. Even Mr. Juncker had a little laugh when I said it. He's got a sense of humour. I don't think those people are bad. I think that they have an objective, which is to make us subject to the EU, and they've succeeded in doing it. Other people couldn't make us subject to the Spanish Empire or the French Empire or the German Empire, but they've made it possible to do it to the EU
ultimately,
Empire.
The reason why we might not be leaving the EU is because we can't agree on how we, in this country, our parliament, our leaders cannot agree on how to leave the EU.
Well, exactly. That's why I've called them quislings and collaborators, because they don't want to. If it would be quite simple if you'd have done it the way I said it should be done. You'd say we're not going down the Article 50 road. We repeal the 1972 European Communities Act. But then you say to the EU, well, don't worry, because there won't be chaos, because all of your law has been transposed into our law as Acts of Parliament. We're going to offer you, as a kick-off, we're going to offer you continued tariff-free trade or WTO, your choice. You can have equal rights for citizens, no problem, we'll give you that. Then we'll start to dismantle, amend and repeal all the 19,000 directives, 170,000 individual bits of legislation, and we'll do that according to our
language
priorities
is
and
important.
timescales.
So, I mean, there are many people who agree with you that the sequence of withdrawal discussions was wrong. That Article 50 should not have been triggered at the beginning. But use words like traitors, quislings and collaborators is just frankly unacceptable.
Why is it?
This is because it's not the language of democracy.
We live in a free country.
It doesn't make you a Democrat. It makes you an extremist.
No, it doesn't make me an extremist. First of all, I think it actually makes me truthful, and there's an awful lot of people listening to this programme that's going to agree that it's truthful. They can disagree if they want to as well, because that's what it means to live in a free country. And what I'm concerned in now increasingly is there are only things which are allowed to be said and other things which are not allowed to be said, which are not subject to the criminal law, by the way.
Okay, I'm talking about judgment here. You said recently we need now to behead the political class politically at the ballot box.
Exactly.
Right. But to behead the political class, this is after one MP was shot and knifed dead, and another one, as we just discovered last week, received an extreme right-wing death threat. I mean, this is just irresponsible language, isn't it?
You did note there, thank you for saying that I said politically at the ballot box.
But you could have also chosen not to use the word behead.
Well, I could have chosen to use 1,000 other words, but they're the ones I did choose to, because I was making a speech in Whitehall where in 1649 Charles I, who put himself in opposition to Parliament, actually did lose his head. And now
we've moved on a bit since then, haven't we?
Now Parliament has put itself in opposition to the people, and they need to go politically. And I was making a comparison, but a purely political one.
Okay, Suzanne Evans, former deputy chairman of the party that you now lead, who ran for leader in 2016, recently said that she's been increasingly alarmed in recent months by the perverse direction of the party under its current leader, you.
Well, that perverse direction includes taking it off the floor financially. We're about to go insolvent. Membership was crashing through the floor. We were losing 1,000 people a month. We went down to 17,000. I've now put us on a firm track financially. We now have money to pay for our operational costs. We've raised lots of money to fight elections. I've employed staff. And membership is now up to well over 28,000. So if that's perverse, I can take a bit more of that.
All right. We'll pick those things up later on. Gerard Batten in the studio is going to stick around, I hope, for a bit. We're going to a break now. Just to remind you that I'm Matt Frei, and this is LBC. The time is 11:15.
This is LBC. Matt Frei on LBC.
Okay. All right. We still have Gerard Batten, the leader of UKIP, here in the studio. Let me ask you this question. I mean, there must be, we speak to them all the time, Tories in despair at what's happening at their government level, at their leadership level. Why aren't they calling you up and saying we want to be members of UKIP or we want to join forces with you?
In fact, funnily enough, I was out for a dinner with a number of Tory members. It wasn't a Tory group, but it was a lot of Tory members there in Strasbourg a couple of weeks ago. It was a social thing in the evening, and they were absolutely despair. And I said, well, why don't you come and join us? Oh, we've got to give them another chance. Yeah, I mean, this is the trouble. It's the tribalism in politics, and people.
But is the trouble also your language? They just think you're too inflammatory and too extreme.
And there's
they don't want to be in a club with you.
Look, mate, there's a lot of people out there that come up to me, and there's a lot of people who are joining UKIP because they like somebody who speaks in plain language and says what they think, and that's what I do. Personally. What I think the way to break this logjam in the tribalism in politics is to have a reform voting system. One of our primary policies now is to have a proportional representation system so that people get what they vote for. So many people in elections, and I've been doing this for 26 years, will agree with you totally and say, I must vote Tory because we can't have Labour, or I must vote Labour because we can't have Tory. If people got what they actually voted for, we could completely transform the House of Commons, and then we would get people elected in proportion that people voted for them, and we could get away from these safe seats and this tribalism.
Right. When government ministers say, as they've said again this morning, that if we delay Brexit for too long, if we get another referendum, we are going to tease out the right-wing and left-wing extreme elements in British politics. Right. They're talking about you, aren't they?
Well, I'm not a right-wing extremist. I'm not a left-wing extremist. You've got the left-wing extremists in Commons now. You've got a Marxist, anti-Semitic Labour Party,
and you're an anti-Islamic. Anti-death cult Islamic right-wing extremist.
I'm not right-wing.
With a right-wing thug as your advisor.
Let me, first of all, I'm not right-wing. I have policies, for example, purely a personal view. It isn't a party policy. I'd be quite happy to renationalise all the utilities. I think it was a massive con. I agree with Jeremy.
You're a national socialist.
No, I'm not a socialist. I think I think there are some things which are so big that they are monopolies by their very nature. And then with that, I would agree with Jeremy Corbyn on one of the very few. Actually, we agreed on the EU for about 40 years, and he decided to change his policy. But if you're going to call me right-wing, Matt, tell me what right-wing is, please. You
Actually, I call
define
you extreme
it.
right-wing.
Why would you? Define what that means.
Because you're Islamophobic. You stir up hatred, against minorities in this country. And you liken EU leaders to Adolf Hitler. I mean, that is just unacceptable
Matt, I talk about an ideology. I don't like totalitarian ideologies. I don't want to live under one, whether it be a left-wing, right-wing or Islamic.
But you're not living under one. You're living in a democracy.
Exactly, and I want to keep it that way, which is why I'm defending it. And I do not want to live, and I don't want my descendants to live under an Islamic totalitarian system.
Which they're not about to.
Well, they would if they lived in an Islamic country like Saudi Arabia or
Britain.
Bahrain, where they brought back Sharia.
Saudi Arabia, we're in Britain.
Exactly, now we are, but let's keep it that way. Let's defend it and
keep it that way. Is there any suggestion that it might not be that way?
In the future, yes.
Come on.
Well,
you don't really believe that, do you?
In the future, yes.
What, you think there'll be Sharia law in Britain?
Yes. They've told the fundamentalists and the literalist interpreters, who are the people that I have a problem with, these are saying that that's what they want in Britain in the long term.
Well, I mean, the Scientologists want us all to live on a distant planet in the long term. It's not going to happen.
If there aren't more and more Scientologists.
You say that. I mean, come on. You've got to. The trouble is, this is the problem with people like you, is that you take
people like
people like you, extremists.
I'm extremist.
You are an inflammatory
Matt,
extremist.
we live in a surreal world.
You take something that's a niche opinion.
It's not a niche opinion.
A niche opinion, and you say this is going to be what's running our country. That is just nonsense.
If they are a literalist or fundamentalist or indeed a good Muslim, should want to live under Sharia law, because that's what it says.
But we're talking about a tiny minority within minority.
Well, how do you know they're a tiny minority?
Do you have so little faith in the
British
British democratic system and the values of the society that you'll think we're about to turn into Saudi Arabia? Seriously,
I didn't say we're about to. The primary job of a politician is to prevent preventable evils. And that doesn't mean tomorrow. It means 10 years and 20 years and 30 years in the future. And if we had more politicians who could think long term, we'd be better off. And that's what I'm concerned about. What's the long-term future of this country? Matt, I could retire next week because I'm 65 last week. I could go and forget about it. So, God, why am I bothering with all this? I do it because I have children and I have relatives, and I don't want them living in a country that I can see will not be as good as the country that I grew up in. And that's what I'm trying to defend. And it's a funny old world, isn't it, now, where you're accused of being a right-wing extremist when you want to defend your own constitution, your own laws, your own tradition, your own democratic parliamentary government.
But the constitution, the traditions, the values of this country are not under threat from Islamic extremism. They are just not.
They're not.
I mean, at the moment, they're not functioning very well because of indecision about Brexit, but they are not under threat from Islamic extremism.
Matt, you said,
this is dog whistle politics.
Matt, you've used the term people like me, so I'll use the term people like you who live in this kind of liberal elite.
No, I'm not. You don't know anything about my politics.
Well, you don't know anything about mine, really.
Well,
you just called me a right-wing
politician.
extremist.
You're the leader of a party.
You just called me a right-wing extremist. But you see, you belong to that group of people who just want to live in this cloud cuckoo land where it's not a problem. It's not going to be a problem in the future. So people like me must be wrong because they talk about it.
There's a difference between talking about it and raising it as, a fundamental threat, of this country. Let's talk about the elections again, the European parliamentary elections. So UKIP was elected with 24 MEPs last time round, which is, massive chunk. And now you've got how many?
7.
So what happened to the others?
Quite a few of them left before I took over. Some of them have left, I think, some of them have said they don't like what I'm doing. OK, so why didn't they stay? One thing I would say about all of these people, they signed a pledge when they became MEPs for UKIP that said if they left the party for whatever reason, they would hand the seat back to UKIP, to the next person on the UKIP list. When, I can't remember who it was now, somebody left, Nigel Farage castigated them for not doing that. And then he went and left and did exactly the same thing. If he didn't like what I was doing, if they didn't like what I was doing, they should have stayed in the party, said, we know Gerard a long time, which they have. We all got on fine. We don't agree with what he's doing. We are going to oppose him. When the leadership comes up for election in 12 months' time, because I only took it on for 12 months to save the party, we're going to run someone against him. Nigel could have run against me. Why didn't they do that?
Right. But the fact is that you lost all these MEPs, How will, you've got all these different parties now presumably competing for the same bit of political real estate in these EU elections if we actually take part of them. How can you, solve that problem? I mean, how can you get them all under one umbrella?
Interesting as well, in the second term in which I served, from 2009 to 14, Nigel Farage managed to lose 45% of the MEPs, and at one point I was joking that it might just be me and him left there together in the Parliament as UKIP. How are we going to get them together?
Do you see his party as a threat, by the way? Do you see Nigel Farage's new party as a threat?
First of all, it's just him and a name. They don't have any...
But he's got a lot of charisma, doesn't he? I mean, he's a good campaigner.
I've always given him full credit for that. He's a brilliant performer. But his party is just him. It's a name. They're not going to have a proper structure. They don't have members. They have subscribers. They don't have a national executive governing body because he doesn't want that. And even yesterday, they were putting out an email to their subscribers, inviting people to be candidates and charging them £100 a time to be assessed. It's going to be declared next week. And a week before, they're still selecting the candidates. We've been doing it for months.
Are you too busy hating each other to actually come up with a unified message?
I've got a unified message, the same one I've had for 26 years.
But all the other lot who are competing for your votes.
Unconditional, unilateral withdrawal, no surrender, no compromise. It's a simple message which leavers can understand and vote for. No hedging about, no qualifying, no ifs and buts.
If we take part in these elections, you're back in the European Parliament, will you carry on giving the kind of speeches that you've given before, which have got you ticking off, and I think even a fine from the European Parliament?
No. The person who complained about what I said wanted me reported to the president. So we'll see what they do. Quite frankly, I don't care what they do, because if they suspend me for a while, it'll just see my vote go up even more in the European elections. So I'll be quite happy for them to do that. They did it to Nigel, if you may remember, when he called Rumpoy a wet dishcloth, and Nigel said it was the best thing they ever did for him.
And will you be obstructive in the European Parliament?
We never vote for EU legislation. We have a clear policy which all our candidates sign up to, which is we don't recognise their legitimate, democratic, legitimate right to legislate over us. We oppose all legislation. We only vote for amendments within legislation where that returns power to the nation state, and that doesn't happen very often.
So why are you even campaigning to sit in a parliament whose existence you fundamentally don't believe in?
Because it has. This is one of the strange tricks of history, in that we can win in European elections because it's proportional representation. So we do, in order to represent the British people who want to leave, and we promote that message. And I can't wait for the day when we have proportional representation in the House of Commons. We have a reformed House of Lords where we have a PR elected second amending chamber, and then we'll see how people like my party get on and how other parties get on, and accept the democratic outcome rather than the stitched-up, managed, corrupt system we've got now.
And the language that you've been using, again, I get back to these words like, death cult when it comes to Islam, comparing EU leaders to Adolf Hitler, all that stuff, which clearly plays very well with, with some of the audience. Can we expect more of that, or are you going to turn that down?
I will always say what I believe at the time. And in fact, I've never had to retract anything. You don't like what I've said, but I can defend it. So I've not actually had to apologise for anything.
But it makes you a pariah in British politics, doesn't it?
Does it? Well, I'm not bothered about
Your former deputy leader of your party said, it's an anti-Islamic perverse direction. Nigel Farage, not exactly, a moderate in the political landscape of this country, has called you unacceptable. I mean,
what matters in the final analysis is how many people votes for you. Politics is about votes. And if people vote for me, I'm happy. If they don't, fair enough. I don't have to do this. I'm doing this out of sense of duty and responsibility.